Well, I've managed to find Lord Frost here at the Arc event near the Millennium Dome. And I wanted to ask you, David, why are you here at this event?
Well, it's a great event for one thing. There are loads and loads of really interesting people here to talk to on the right of politics and culture. So it's fantastic to have got so many people together. But I think it's also what we're talking about that's important. And I think a lot of people feel that our societies, Western societies, have begun to lose touch with some of the things that have made us successful. Limited government, free markets, political and economic freedom, but also a sense of values and truth and reality in the way we conduct ourselves and manage our society. And those are the kind of things that don't get talked about very much. There isn't much space for them in normal politics, but those are the things that we're talking about here today. And if we're to get out of the crisis that Western societies are sinking gradually into, then we've got to have these kind of discussions. So that's why it's so fascinating.
Why do you think that we've come to this place where we are almost, delusion is more, you have to be careful what you say? People who are in a deluded reality in many respects, in many things, you have to be so considerate to their feelings instead of what is obvious to your own eyes. And obviously by that I'm talking about things like transgender and the conversations around those sort of issues.
There's so much going on, I think. One thing is we're in a bit of a crisis of free speech, I think, where there is gradual constraint of the space of what people can say, and part of the reason is I think the authorities fear that people can't cope with robust debate about things. They'll be offended, they'll be upset, whereas I think people can in fact cope with these things, and the best way to deal with them is through properly talking about them. So that's one problem. And the other is a sense that we're losing touch with a sense of absolute values, I suppose, that some things are just true or better than others as a way of running your society. And when we can't say absolute truths, like a man can't become a woman, then we've got a problem. So I think there are some quite deep trends that the first step to dealing with is recognizing what they are and talking about them, and then trying to push back a bit.
What do you think it took Keir Starmer so long to say what a woman is? What was that about?
I just think it shows that people like him, the Labour Party, progressive, so-called progressive politicians, I don't think they are progressive, but that's what they call themselves. They live in a kind of bubble of received opinions about things. Nobody ever debates them, they just repeat them to each other, and all of a sudden reality breaks in and they realise they look a bit sort of daft, and then they adjust their position. But that's why it's so crucial to keep forcing reality to break in on these things and have discussions.
Do you think we'll eventually penetrate through that? Because obviously events like this are part of it, but do you think we'll eventually manage to push through and get past these sort of...
I do. I sense that we are maybe approaching a bit of a turning point. So there's definitely different ideas around. I think a lot of the forces of collectivization, collective views of things that we've seen over the last 20 years, the sense that government's responsible for everything, can provide everything for you, and then of course COVID and the pandemic handling, I think scared quite a lot of people about the vision of society that kind of made us live in. And I do believe that it's making people rethink a bit. Do we want to carry on down this road where nobody is really responsible for their own lives? They always look to others, and the assumption is people can't manage without help. And the title of this conference, ARC, is the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and that's what we've got to build. Responsible citizens who can and are excited by the prospects of running their own lives and developing their lives accordingly, not looking to somebody else the whole time.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned COVID, and of course the COVID inquiry, which has been dragging on and on and on. What is your view on it as a whole?
Well, I mean, I've only watched bits of it, obviously, though I've read quite a bit of the evidence and the transcripts and so on, and it just seems to me it's losing its way, to be honest. They seem to have decided what the story is, which is that we, in their view, we should have locked down sooner. And now they are simply interrogating all the WhatsApps and all the messaging to find out why that didn't happen. And it just seemed to be degenerating into a kind of gotcha, attributing blame kind of inquiry, rather than trying to investigate what happened, why it happened, and whether we got it right and whether we should do it again. And that's what I want to know of this. Did we get it right? Should we have done something different? And I'm extremely worried that we're going to spend all these years going through this inquiry and we're not going to find an answer to these questions. So I think Baroness Helen really needs to take a look at the way she's running this inquiry and try and get it back on track.
Because it's all about the WhatsApp messages, and he said and she said, and it's like, well, what we want to know is why weren't we prepared for the pandemic? How can we prepare ourselves properly, and how we should be communicating to the citizens of this country about what we should be doing if anything like that happens again.
Absolutely, and I think this focus on WhatsApps, I mean, I think most people probably wouldn't particularly want their WhatsApps sort of gone through as a revelation of how they thought about the world. I mean, it's just government, and government's no different. Government is, you can't base your view of what happened through going through somebody's messaging. It needs to be a bit more sophisticated than that if we're going to get to the right answers.
And we've Brexited. You were a major force in the whole sort of Brexit agreement. How do you think we've done so far?
Well, I'm slightly driven mad by this assumption that seems to be around that Brexit is failing. And you talk to so many people and they will say this to you. And it is simply not true. Britain was the fastest growing big economy in Europe in 21 and 22. We've seen the ONS revise the statistics. Our trade is the biggest it's ever been. We've got a whole set of new reforms that have come through after Brexit. The truth is, we changed this country's entire economic model, took it out of a customs union, took it out of a single market, changed so much about the way we run it, brought democracy back home. You can't even see any of this in the growth figures. And all of those people who said it was an inevitable disaster, we'd have a recession, everything would go wrong, it's simply not proven to be the case. And I just wish the government would talk about that and say it a bit more, rather than kind of giving in the whole time to those who say it's all been a bit of a waste of time, hasn't it?
I don't know why they don't do more and show more about how, in a way, a success it has been, because we now have the freedom to move, and also we can work with other countries without having to get the permission of the EU. And this is great. This is great, especially for the African countries that we can work with. If anything, people called it, it's racist, this is that. It isn't. We're opening the door to countries that aren't necessarily full of mostly white people.
Absolutely. So I've talked to quite a few people from African countries at this event in the last 24 hours, and almost without exception, they wanted to talk about trade relationship between Britain and the UK and how there are new opportunities after Brexit. I know that will sound a bit implausible to people as a kind of normal subject of conversation, but that's really what they have been interested in, and we absolutely can deliver on that. Brexit is about bringing democracy back home, running our own affairs, taking our own decisions, and we can now do that, and we should be excited about that as a country, not mired in gloom about it.
We should be, even if we're running it quite badly. I mean, the Tory party, the way they've conducted themselves over the last year, it is no surprise that a lot of people seem to be gravitating to Keir Starmer. Do you think they have a hope in hell of winning the next election?
I do. I don't give up on anything until the votes are counted, and we've seen so many ups and downs in the last few years in politics that who knows what could happen. We've seen the stress the Labour Party's gone under in the last week or two over the Israel-Hamas issue. Who knows how politics will develop? But having said all that, the Conservative Party hasn't conducted itself brilliantly, probably over the last couple of years. And our big problem is that over half the people who voted for us in 2019 say they don't want to vote for us again. So those are the people we've got to get back, and in my view that's by trying to deliver what we promised in 2019, some proper Conservative policies, cutting down on immigration, legal and illegal, low taxes, getting a grip on net zero properly, getting a grip on the NHS and reforming it, all those sort of things. We've got to show we've got an actual programme for government and we can make a difference to this country. And if we can do that, I think we can bring people back in.
And finally, Boris Johnson joining GB News. How good is that? It's good, isn't it?
It's great. I'm very glad to see Boris given a kind of a platform to talk about what he's done. And he will be, whatever his failings, and everybody has failings, he will be one of the most consequential prime ministers in this country's history. Took us out of the EU. For all the failings over the pandemic, we still got out of it sooner and had a less tough lockdown than many. His leadership on Ukraine, all those things will make him a figure in history where many of his critics will have long gone by.
Well, listen, Lord Frost, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you.
And you.